my speech over Winston Churchill's Blood, Sweat, and Tears. And I've actually read several different titles for this speech. I've heard Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and then Blood, Sweat, Toil, and Tears, Blood, Toil, Tears, and Sweat. So it's kind of interesting to see how people have taken that one line and just emphasized the points that really stand out. It is mostly just those 4 words, though. But I chose this speech because I love the time period of World War II. I love the romanticism and the heroism, and I love the leaders of that time. And a lot of times we think of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, probably because we're Americans, but that's probably the main person that we think of. But Winston Churchill played a huge role in World War II, not only for the British people, but for the American side, for the Allied alliance as well. And so when I hear the phrase blood, sweat, and tears, a lot of times I think of my mom in the kitchen when she's like, I put my blood, sweat, and tears into this meal and you better like it. Or an athlete who goes, I put my blood, sweat, and tears in this performance, I want this, I want to win. I think of someone who really wants something. And Winston Churchill definitely did want something. He put his whole essence into World War II. He literally put blood, sweat, tears, and toil. And I think that's just so cool. And so in this speech, I'm going to talk about Churchill as a person, his education, and his military background, because that really helped shape him as an orator. And then I'm also going to talk about the style, context, and delivery of the speech itself. And then finally, I'll talk about the impact Churchill had and the impact the speech had on World War II and afterwards. So Winston Churchill was the son of a very political family. He was born Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill on November 30th, 1874, to an American mother, Jenny Jerome, and a British father, Lord Randolph Churchill. So a very politically active family. They were considered social elite in Britain. His mother was an American heiress, so they had a lot of money, and her family contributed to the military regime through the American Revolution. Her family contributed to helping colonies in America become free from British rule. And his father was the youngest Chancellor of Exchequer, I believe that's how you say it, in 100 years that Britain had seen. So he was very politically accomplished. And then his family aided the political and military realm through Queen Anne's campaigns. They won a lot of campaigns for Queen Anne and led a lot of those charges. But unfortunately, Winston Churchill was a big disappointment to his father. His father wanted him to follow in his footsteps, be accomplished in every aspect of his military and educational life, and unfortunately he wasn't. And then his mother wasn't a very good mother figure either. She was more concerned with her role as a wife, and she knew she had to be by her husband's side as a social elite, and she had to be at all these political meetings, and sometimes they didn't even let Churchill come home because they would be out and they didn't want him home alone, or they didn't want him in their scene. So unfortunately, that's the kind of house he grew up in. But he was kind of able to meld that into a great career. He's very accomplished. He was an officer, writer, historian, and artist, and then most importantly, he was an orator, which is what he's probably best known for. When he was younger, he hated school. He did not like the regime. He didn't want to follow the normal tendency of school and all of the curriculum and stuff like that. He did find that he excelled in English and history, and I feel like he really cultivated those skills and helped make them into the career he later develops. He did attend the Royal Military College in Sandhurst, but to get into the Royal Military College, you had to take an entrance exam. And he failed the exam 2 times and had to take it a 3rd time. The 3rd time he actually passed, but his score wasn't high enough to allow him to enter the infantry, which is what his father really wanted. So he joined the cavalry. In World War I, he fought in the Royal Navy, or he served in the Royal Navy, and he had various successes and defeats. He had quite a few defeats, but I think he was able to take those and use those as Prime Minister later on. And like I said, he became Prime Minister in 1940, which was a very crucial time for Great Britain. He became Prime Minister at the opportune time when they really, really needed it. And I remember reading a quote that said he felt like his whole life had led up to this moment, despite all of his past discrepancies and such. So this speech was made actually 3 days after he came into office. He came into office on May 10th, 1940, and he gave the speech 3 days later on May 13th. He was not the most popular person with Parliament. He had just replaced Neville Chamberlain, and they had opposing views. Chamberlain wanted to appease Hitler and wanted to negotiate with him, but Churchill wanted nothing to do with Hitler. He wanted to crush him, oppose him. He knew him as an enemy, and that's all he knew him as, which I think is a pretty good policy if you're at war. So he replaced Neville Chamberlain, but Parliament was not too happy with that. They wanted a more conservative prime minister, and Churchill was more liberal. Churchill wrote all of his own speeches. It was said that he spent an hour per minute on a speech, so he really devoted time to figuring out what language he wanted to use, what style, and the context of the situation. He's best known for his sound bites, or memorable phrases, like blood, sweat, and tears. He gave really good sound bites, and he used very romantic and verbose old-fashioned language, which again Parliament didn't like. They questioned his policies and they questioned his relevance during that time. This particular speech was a radio broadcast, which served a very important purpose. It made it so that he could give a short, concise speech, but also reach the masses, because he had to appease Parliament and all of these worried British citizens. Like I said, he used very important language, and I think this percentage is a testament to what a great speaker he was. From May to October, he rose from 51% to 89% success rate. So it's not a huge increase, but it definitely does show some progress that he was popular in the people's eyes. And this was all within 1940. So before I get to this quote, I picked out some of the most memorable phrases that I thought from the speech that really expressed his romantic and verbose language, such as preliminary phase, monstrous tyranny, and lamentable catalog. Those just kind of stand out as just, he could have said something completely different. When he's talking to the people, he could have just said, point 1, point 2, point 3, but he really wanted to show them the gravity of the situation and really include them in this whole political campaign. So this is one of my favorite quotes. I have several. And there's Churchill with his V for Victory sign. And the quote says, "You ask what is our aim? I can answer in one word. It is victory. Victory at all costs. Victory in spite of all terrors. Victory, however long and hard the road may be. For without victory, there is no survival." So the historical context of the speech is very important. Like I said, he entered office in 1940, and then all within that year, he had to endure the Blitz, the Battle of Britain, all of these things. So in 1940, when he became prime minister, Nazi Germany had dominated most of Europe, and any of Great Britain's allies were miles away, and they did not have as strong resources as Great Britain did. So Hitler targeted Britain next. He knew it was the big empire he needed to really get his hold on Europe. But the only thing standing between him and Great Britain was Churchill and the Royal Air Force. The Royal Air Force was the gem of Great Britain. It gave them the most military strength that they had. So all of this kind of culminated at the Battle of Britain, which happened in September 1940. Note, like, it's the same year. So he has a lot going on. His first year in office, he's a pretty busy guy. So Great Britain ended up winning the Battle of Britain, but it depleted all of their sources. So you could say it was worth it, but at the end they were really struggling. I remember Churchill asked one of his committee members, "What else can we send out?" And the committee member said, we've done everything we can. They didn't have anything left to give, which is a testament to Churchill as a person and just to the war in general. Also the bombings, the Blitz bombings. It hurt London architecturally, morally, but it also served as an opportunity for Churchill to distract Hitler. So he kind of took a bad situation and twisted it so that he could use it to his best advantage. And now I have a clip. And then while the clip is playing, it's an audio clip. Let me find it. And while it's playing, I just want y'all to listen for like the confidence and certainty in his voice, and then also the slight changes in volume.
Instruction will make all allowances for any lack of ceremony with which it has been necessary to act. I would say to the House, as I said to those who have joined the government, I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. We have before us an ordeal of the most grievous kind. We have before us many, many long months of struggle and of suffering. You ask, what is our policy? I will say, it is to wage war by sea, land, and air, with all our might, with all the strength that God can give us, to wage war against a monstrous tyranny never surpassed in the dark and lamentable catalogue of human crime. That is our policy. You ask, what is our aim? I can answer in one word, victory. Victory at all costs. Victory in spite of all terror. Victory however long and hard the road may be. But without victory there is no survival. Let that be realized. No survival for the British Empire. No survival for all that the British Empire stood for. No survival for the urge and impulse of the ages that mankind will move forward towards its goal. But I take up my task with buoyancy and hope. I feel sure that our cause will not be suffered to fail among men. At this time I feel entitled to claim the aid of all. As I say, come then, let us go forward together with our united strength.
Okay, so I came up with some little analogies that I found from the speech. Whenever he's talking about something dealing with the facts or with regime or policy, which we didn't listen to in the clip, but he has a very formal and almost monotone speech, which I think is fine in his case because he is talking to Parliament as well as to the people, and he kind of has to lay out, this is what I've done and this is what I'm going to do. He has to get the important stuff in somehow. So I think it's fine that he did that. When he's talking about the situation and the reality of the war, he gets very solemn and serious, and his voice gets a little deeper. And he doesn't sugarcoat it, which is I really like. He doesn't tell the people, well, it's not that bad. He tells them, this is what's happening, this is a real threat. And he gets very, very serious. When he's talking about the future and the hope and his plans for Great Britain and for the war, he gets very fatherly. And I don't know if it's just because of his accent or what, but it's very comforting to me leading into the next one. His confidence is very comforting. It's very assured. And I think as a leader, you have to have that, and I think he did. So some other things, he was quiet. And it's kind of hard to notice, but when he was talking about policy, he goes, what is our policy? And he kind of drops down a little bit. And to me, that's kind of inviting the people in, because they're all asking that question. He just got into office 3 days ago. They're asking, what are you going to do for us? And so he wants to invite them in and kind of tell them, this is what I'm going to do. And when he says, I will give my blood, tears, toil, and sweat, he starts low, and then he progresses up and gets louder and louder. And when he's talking about victory, 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 he gets louder, and survival, it's all that kind of thing, leading into repetition. I think he repeats these words because he wants to show them how big this war is, and he wants to show them how big this threat is, but he also wants to show them how committed he is and what he's going to do. And I think repetition accomplishes that very effectively. And I already mentioned fatherly. And then confident, I believe his confidence shines through in his speed. And I know it's kind of ironic because you think if he knew what he was talking about, he knew he wanted to tell them, he would say point by point by point. But I think his speed plays to his advantage. I think it shows that he is confident and that he is that father figure and that he's there to reassure them. And speed doesn't always do that, but I believe his slow, confident manner, again, it might be his accent, but yes. So, Winston Churchill, getting my figures mixed up, Winston Churchill became very good friends with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. They had the Grand Alliance of Joseph Stalin, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and Winston Churchill. But Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Winston Churchill really did form a bond, and that helped Great Britain form political ties with America as well. He became Prime Minister again in 1951, which I think speaks to his testimony as a leader. He was able to lead Great Britain in war times and in peace times. So I think that speaks to him as a man. And then I love this quote by John F. Kennedy. It says, he mobilized the English language and sent it into battle, showing that speech really was his greatest weapon. He didn't go out and fight in World War II like he did in World War I, but he used his speech and his confidence and his ability as a leader to rally these people together. And that's exactly what it did. This opening speech, his first speech as Prime Minister, really did provide a rallying point for the people. And he did have victories and defeats throughout the war. They won the war, obviously. He helped lead them to victory. But as a result, Britain went bankrupt. And they had to liquidate they basically had to liquidate the entire empire. And so he was defeated by the Labour Party in 1945 when he ran for Prime Minister. He lost the election. But it wasn't because he wasn't popular. The people loved him. They loved his speech style. They loved what he did for the country during the war. But they didn't like the economic situation that had ensued. They were ready for a more socialist change. They weren't afraid of socialism at that point because they wanted to rely on themselves more now that the war was over. Perhaps his greatest contribution to post-World War II was the Cold War. It ensued right after. And there's a picture of Joseph Stalin and Winston Churchill. And I think that was before the Cold War, when they were still on speaking terms. But he had a certain respect for Stalin. They'd both been in the same situation just years before. They'd both been up against the wall, cornered by Hitler. They understood each other. They understood their tactics, their policies, and so they did have a mutual respect for each other. But in the Cold War, Churchill tried to contribute with a three-part strategy, and that included military strength, dialogue with Russia, so that the nuclear warfare didn't happen. They wanted to try and prevent that at all costs. And then the United States and Europe. They wanted to rally within each other, within their continent. And so even though he didn't have as great an effect on the Cold War as he did in World War II, he definitely contributed his ideas. So throughout Churchill's life, he had many successes, many failures in World War I as well as World War II. But he did rise as this resolute leader that we still remember today. I had the other favorite quote, but this is my second favorite quote. It says, "You ask what is our policy? I say it is to wage war by land, sea, and air, war with all our might and with all the strength God has given us, and to wage war against a monstrous tyranny never surpassed in the dark and lamentable catalogue of human crime. That is our policy." And I think one of the reasons that I picked it as my favorite is because after I listened to it, I was like, whoa, I was hanging on every single word he said. Like, I was there. And it was just so cool. Again, it might be the accent, but I really like British accents, so. But as a person, he was able to take his experiences in his early life with education and his military role, even the disappointments of his father, he used as a learning tool for himself. And then in the speech itself, he uses his eloquent language and his confidence to really give comfort to the people themselves. And then afterwards, he's still a very prominent figure today. We still remember Winston Churchill. You hear Winston Churchill, you think of World War II, you think of victory. And he definitely did that through the Battle of Britain, through even his efforts in the Cold War. He still wanted to help in some way. And so I think the main, excuse the language, but I think the main point that we can take from Winston Churchill is that he was a beacon of hope, and he did advocate for finding the light in the darkness. And so this is a country song, I think by Rodney Atkins, if anyone knows it, but if you're going through hell, keep going. And that's really what he did. He put his blood, toil, tears, and sweat into this entire war, and he kept going. It looked like a very bleak situation in 1940, but he didn't give up. He led Great Britain through that war. He was a realist, and I really like that about him. He didn't sugarcoat it, he did what he had to do. He kept going. And that's what I really admire about Winston Churchill, this speech in particular.